welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your game girl, Madelyn.
I'm your Nintendo 3DS XL host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. It's side quest time. It's Emma's side quest. So Emma, what are we talking about this week?
This week we are talking about portable consoles and put your phone away. Unless you're listening to the podcast on your phone. But not phones.
I'm sure we've talked plenty about mobile gaming in various ways, and I'm sure we will in various ways many a time again.
Yes. For all the youngins out there, there used to be, consoles that were smaller than the Switch back in my day.
They never will be again. You know that, right?
I know. Well, never count Nintendo out,
You are right that they released the 35th anniversary edition Game & Watch Zelda thing.
I just mean Nintendo makes moves that are ununderstandable to me at all times. So they could do whatever, and I would be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Fair enough. I just mean to say,
in both good and bad ways, right?
I think even phones aren't the size of phones aren't handheld anymore.
My phone is approximately the same size as my 3DS folded up.
Sure.
Approximately.
I'm just saying. I keep watching these new iPhones come out, and they're the size of my head.
Well, they've got to be big if you're going to play Resident Evil 4 Remake on them.
That's so crazy to me that the iPhone 15 Pro will play Resident 4 Evil. I'm just imagining myself. I know that PlayStation Remote Play is a thing on phones, right? But I'm imagining my phone, using my phone, having a DualSense and playing a game on my current cell phone. And it's just that's hilarious to me.
Yeah, the streaming to your phone and playing on your phone has been a thing for a while. I think what's different about this is it will play natively on your phone. You will install it on your phone.
That's also funny to me, given that once a month, my phone gives me a pop-up when I open my email that's you don't even have enough storage to look at your email.
Yeah.
The idea that I could download Assassin's Creed onto my phone when my phone is actually, you can't take a video right now. There's not room.
But we're not talking about phones. Phones are the PC of the PC and console, right?
That's a good metaphor.
So we're talking about portable consoles. Things made specifically for gaming, not just things you happen to also play games on.
I think this podcast is going to have a lot of old man yells at cloud energy.
Man, I miss portable. I miss my DS. I still have my 3DS. I miss games made for the DS, It
is, not to jump, I'll jump all the way to the modern day here before we dive into the history of portable consoles. But it does seem like the direction that we're swimming is not toward making games that are designed to play on mobile, but in making our mobile consoles more and more able to play things that we play on our TVs.
Which is so fascinating if you go back through history, because that is why Sony's portable consoles had trouble.
Yep.
And yet that is what we are doing now. They were just too early to the game, I guess.
Well, let's circle back around to that. I think there's a lot to talk about, what our culture of porting games has to do with this, what game streaming has to do with this. I don't know, why the heck that this all seems to have started to explode during a pandemic when no one was going anywhere of it all, right?
Yeah.
Lots to talk about of where we are now, but let's zoom back in history. It's the early days of portable consoles.
Yeah, so there were a few things released, back in the 80s.
Late 70s, if we're going to talk about the Microvision.
Yeah, but all of those were, like, mostly made for, like, a few games, and mostly did not do very well.
Yeah.
I loved going through, like, the Wikipedia as, like, a list of handheld game consoles, and I loved how many of them, the last bullet point was, like, commercial failure.
Yeah.
I used love there in, like, I wasn't happy about it, but it was very funny.
No, it seems like, I mean, one of the first, which I think we've talked about on the show before in, like, the retro gaming or console generations or whatever, was the Microvision. And yeah, to, like, give a sense of how revolutionary the Game Boy was when it would come out, like, a decade later, like, the Microvision, you had this little guy, and the cartridge that you put on, like, you literally, like, snapped on the buttons in addition to the game. Which is, like, a wild, like, imagine doing that on, like, the Steam Deck.
Yeah.
So that one sold very well for, like, a year. And then, according to the article I was reading anyway, it was, like, people preferred, like, the Simon games. You know, like, the little thing that has, like, the 4 buttons and you have to remember the pattern. They were, like, they were more interested in that. That was handheld gaming. And it's like, that's so funny.
You know what? Was the Bop It a portable game console?
The Bop It is a bold handheld. There's some bold hardware decisions.
Man, I played the Bop It so much, at least 1 year in SAC.
Yes.
The after school program that I went to in elementary school.
In the year that we made Emma live in a sack.
That's sort of what it sounded like out of context. Yeah, I was very into the Bop It.
I feel like there have to be, I'd like to watch some videos of, like, man beats Elden Ring using the Bop It as a controller.
There have to be.
That feels
the Bop
very
It
good.
has to be a controller that people use, you know?
But anyway, all of these things, basically, nobody could make it work before the Game Boy. And then nobody could really make it work after the Game Boy either. Really, it was just the Game Boy.
You know, the Game Gear, Sega's Game Gear, which came after, did okay. It just did not match the explosive sales of the Game Boy. So Nintendo, you point out, and I did know this, but they had previously released, like, the Game & Watch, which was, like, a really tiny little thing that had a few different, like, very simple games on it, right?
Usually just one. Like an easy mode and a hard mode.
Oh, really? They just had one. You'd buy different ones. Interesting. I didn't know that. But they decided to take this, which the initial idea for this had come from Gunpei Yokoi, the Metroid series creator, who was watching a bored businessman play with his LCD calculator, which, real.
Very real.
Very real bored businessman.
Yeah. Been there.
I did that too. And so they decided, like,
they must not do that, right? Like, kids today just must not do that.
Do you think that they don't use like in advanced math classes, they don't use like the fancy
they definitely do, but they have access to their cell phones all the time.
Oh, you're right.
That's what I mean. They definitely still use graphing calculators. I can verify that. But why would you play on that when you're
getting less trouble during math class
under your desk?
Less chance of getting in trouble during math class, you know?
I guess.
But based on the idea of, like, playing with a calculator, essentially, they worked and they made the Game Boy, which was apparently also the invention of the D-pad, fundamental to all controller designs today. So they made just this very little thing, had a couple buttons and the D-pad that you could move around. Looked awful. Yep. Black and white.
Technically, like green. Green.
You're right. It was like green, yeah. But people loved it because you know what? You can play Tetris on it.
Truly, Tetris was the killer app for the Game Boy.
I kept reading so many articles. Yeah,
is like the Game Boy succeeded because it came bundled with Tetris.
People love Tetris, man.
Look, people love Tetris. I know. I learned about it in the movie, but like, it's just now if you want to play Tetris, you type in Tetris to your search bar and you go to freetetris.com or whatever, and you play it. The idea of like, I know I'm always this way when we're talking about old games, and I'm like, oh my god, technology has marched forward, right? But it's just so funny that everything's just like, yeah, Tetris, the killer app.
We love looking at shapes, you know?
Yeah.
We love fitting shapes together.
Look, no hate to Tetris. It's just, it's fascinating to me that even in like, it's like the Game Boy introduced Tetris to the masses.
Yeah.
The Game Boy.
Yeah.
Wild, man.
Anyway, pretty soon, somewhat soon after the Game Boy came out, there would be a couple other things like Sega's Game Gear and the Lynx, which I don't remember who made that.
Atari, I think.
Atari, that makes sense. That were color displays, I believe. However, because of existing technologies at the time, that took a lot of energy, and these systems weren't ones that you could plug into a wall and recharge, right? You'd have to physically put new batteries into them. So, you know, in one article I laid it out as like the Game Boy used 4 AA batteries, and you got 10 to 14 hours of play with it for each of those batteries. Whereas the Game Gear and the Lynx used 6 AA batteries, and you got like a few hours out of that. Because the color system was just that much more taxing on it. And so that's a lot of money that you're spending. You're buying that console, and then you're buying so many batteries. So the Game Boy is just was way more cost efficient for the time.
I mean, fortunately, all of these things came out in an era where, like, paying to play arcade games was still way more of a thing.
Sure, but there's a difference between putting a quarter in and having to run in the store to buy 6 AA batteries.
100% agreed. But I was just thinking, like, that's crazy. Like, to have to think about your gaming as, like, oh, I get this much that I've paid for an hour. And then I was like, well, but, like, less weird then than that would be now.
Sure, yeah.
Unless you're writing a review on Steam where you're like, paid this amount of money, got this amount of hours out of it, A, B, C, D, F.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's striking how Nintendo's history in the handheld and quasi-handheld space sort of repeats itself over and over again. Every time they release a handheld, it's like everyone talking about it in these articles and these retrospectives and these history pieces. It's like the technological specs of the Game Boy were not very good compared to these other handhelds. The technological specs of the SP, the Game Boy Advance, whatever, were not that good. The Switch, right? Like, it's not that good compared to its, like, console brethren, right? But over and over, it's like, well, but the battery life was better, and it had this one game that you, like, had to play.
Yeah. The Game Boy sort of bolstered the Nintendo's handheld market after, like, 7 years, too, by introducing Pokemon, of course. Which I think is, like, that's a killer app for a lot of Nintendo's portable console history after that.
Yeah, I mean, Pokemon, I mean, what more to say?
Yeah.
Really?
This is even before you get to, like, you know, the Switch era when people start having, you know, complaints. This is, like, the peak Pokemon or whatever.
Notably, by the way, I mean, speaking of batteries, if you're sitting here listening to this thinking, like, oh man, like, I should break out Pokemon Yellow, because, like, I think I still have that Dusty somewhere. You can't. Probably. But you might be able to. But particularly gold, silver, crystal. Many of these like old Game Boy systems, in addition to the batteries that you're going to use to power the system, have a battery in the cartridge that is basically serving as a like, I'm going to keep this just a tiny bit powered all the time so that your save data doesn't disappear. And in the case of gold, silver, and crystal, so that the game can keep track of what time it is. And those batteries don't last forever. And these games are quite old now. So if you were to try to boot up, like, I think we still have some of these somewhere, probably. If you were, not that we have a system we could play them on anymore, but I think we probably still have the cartridges sitting in a little box guy. So, I don't know.
I did go through them at some point because I have been carrying around a few GBA cartridges that I can't use for like 5 years now.
But for some of these Game Boy games, yeah, they won't save. Like, they might boot up, but they won't save, and if there's a clock function, it won't work. You can replace the battery. But it's weird. You don't think of your game cartridge as having a battery in it, but it does. Or it's weird for me anyway, as someone who knows nothing about games.
Yeah. You know nothing about games, even still, Madelyn.
I really don't. What's a game?
Anyway. Nintendo would continue to sort of, exist unopposed in the portable market space. Sega's follow-up to the Game Gear, like the Nomad.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently people thought it was very cool, but like technologically, but real bad commercial failure, even compared to the Game Gear, which sold like acceptably, right?
Yeah.
So Nintendo would go on, they would keep on releasing different forms of the Game Boy. They'd release Wide One, the Game Boy Advance, that was no longer up and down like a calculator, but side to side like a sideways calculator.
A shocking change.
And then they would release the Game Boy Advance SP, which was a foldable one, which is the one I remember us having first. You said we might have had a Game Boy Color, like just a regular Game Boy?
Yes, we definitely had a Game Boy Color. I hope Dad remembers this when he listens to the podcast. But I really remember we got that. I think it was a Christmas gift at, the house. I remember like having Pokemon Yellow, and like we saved the game. I couldn't have been more than like 6 or 7 years old here, so you might not remember this. But like we played the game, we saved it, and then we like turned it back on, and we're like skeptical, like we didn't like believe that it was going to have saved, and it had.
Wow,
that's my memory of the Game Boy Color.
But we definitely had SPs, the foldable ones that folded into a square.
Yeah.
But then in 2004, Nintendo would release the Nintendo DS, which initially in its planning wasn't really supposed to replace the Game Boy, but ended up doing that, I read, which I thought was interesting.
How did they think that those two were going to coexist alongside each other? That's so weird.
I guess like the touch screen.
I guess.
And the dual screens.
Like, I guess. Yeah, I guess.
But the DS did phenomenally. Like it is still the like second best selling console behind the PlayStation 2. Which like we love that Nintendo DS.
Well, it had a total monopoly on the market. I mean, I know the PSP was around.
Yeah, that's what I was moving to. The PSP would also release that same year, which was Sony's first effort into the handheld console market. And similarly to the Game Gear, although I think it did even better than that, it would sell pretty darn well.
Yeah.
Just not compared to the Nintendo DS.
If somebody just told you that I think the PSP sold like 80 million units.
Yeah.
And if somebody just told you, they sold 80 million of those, you'd be like, Wow, that's a lot. I'm making up these numbers. I should pull the actual numbers, but I thought it was 80 million. But then, you compare it to like what the crazy numbers that the DS did. Hang on, here we go. Yeah. So the PlayStation Portable, the PSP did sell about 80 million units. The Nintendo DS sold 154 million units. So like twice as well.
Yep. Which is like, that's so fascinating. And I read some stuff about this, but like the Nintendo DS is just like a fascinating little console to begin with, right? Like the dual screens is something that just has not really been done since or before. Plus it had its touchscreen. Just like what a weird little thing that they made,
Well, it's an exactly I think what I was thinking of when comparing to the kinds of systems that we're seeing be created and announced and used now. It's like you could never do something like the DS now. That sort of thing just does not fit, I feel like, into how the kind of game development pipeline is evolving over the past few years. It's too idiosyncratic.
Yeah. There was this article from The Verge going through the PlayStation Portable and the PlayStation Vita, that sort of talked about, well, one, I think it's really funny that the CEO at the time was like, this will be the Walkman of the 21st century. Extremely funny way to put it. I like it.
Yeah, well, I saw somebody describe a Game Boy as a Walkman, too. Remember Walkman? I do.
What?
Remember Walkman?
I do. I had a Walkman.
Yeah.
I'm so old.
I'm ancient.
And it just talks about the fact that, like, Sony's goal with the PSP was, like, it's like a PS2 that's in your pocket, right? It's like, an advanced little thing that can play, like, advanced games. And so it's, like, far technologically more advanced than the DS. But the DS had a fun little touchscreen. Again, a battery that was better.
Yep.
That lasted longer. And even in like its cartridge system and it's the types of games that they put there were like made sense for portable use. Whereas the PSP had these proprietary UMD drives. What does that stand for again? Universal Media Discs.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking these were really weird looking.
They are weird
when
looking.
I had a PSP. They're like little discs contained within plastic that you like put into the back of your PSP, and you could like jiggle the disc around inside of it. I thought it was really weird.
That's freaky.
Which was like a weird little format to put the game on. And I also thought it was interesting that they talked about, like, because it was shooting for games that were more like the PS2 sort of in your pocket, the games that were made for the PSP weren't as suitable, were not as suitable for portable play as the ones that ended up on the DS a lot of the time. So, despite the PSP being a lot more technologically impressive in like a sort of graphics sense, I guess, the DS was a lot more attractive in terms of, again, its battery life, the types of games on it, the cool little touchscreen, the convenient design.
It's backwards compatible.
Yeah. It was also that doesn't really apply to the PSP, but yes.
That's what I'm saying, though. But like, that's what I'm saying. The PSP was definitely not.
It was nothing.
Yeah.
Nintendo and PlayStation would again release their next systems the same year in 2011. The 3DS again sold really well, although not nearly as good as the initial Nintendo DS.
Yeah, the Nintendo
not even
DS
as good
and
as
the Game Boy really, like, screw up the numbers for literally every other system.
Yeah, it does.
Same thing for the Game Boy Advance. It's like, oh, it did 80 million, but, like, the Game Boy did, like, 120 million.
It's honestly a little impressive that the 3DS did as well as it did, because, like, it's not as much of a change from the DS to the 3DS. It's just the top screen uses stereoscopic 3D effects, essentially.
Yeah.
You can adjust how much 3D you want on the top screen, which was definitely something that the games on the 3DS did not make as much use of as, like, the touch screen or the dual screens, right?
Yeah.
It was just sort of like a neat little feature.
Gimmick.
Than it was like a fundamental part of a lot of the games on its design. But it could play normal DS games too, just without the 3D effect. Although it could no longer play the Game Boy games. Game Boy Advance games didn't have that slot. And Sony would release the PlayStation Vita. Again, not that much of a change from the PSP in its design. Just another, like, long oval thing with a big screen in the middle. It did add a second analog stick so that you could have, like, 3D action games on there without having to use... I remember playing, because I played the Crisis Core remaster this year, but I remember playing the original Crisis Core on PSP, and I think you rotated the camera with the shoulder buttons, because it didn't have a second analog stick, which is so funny to think about now. And the Vita did not very badly. It seems sort of like after the initial launch, Sony just sort of left it out to dry. But it was also a fact of, like, it was made to be like a PS3 in your pocket, right? But people who were making games that were that high definition were developing games for their home console, right? Yeah. They weren't making it for the Vita. So the Vita ended up with a pretty, devoted cult following, because it had a lot of weird, mid-sized games on there. Because that was the what actually ended up developing for it, even though that wasn't actually what it was designed for or marketed as, which ended up sort of killing it in the end.
And then, of course, there's the Nintendo Switch.
Nintendo Switch, again, is so fascinating. It seems like Nintendo was like, the Wii U did badly. Our portable systems are doing, like, fine, but not great. What if we just did
on both of those?
Just did both of them. I hope the Switch 2 is
app.
like...
That's the Nintendo thing. Like, it came out with the Breath of the Wild killer app.
A game that was technically on the Wii U.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
I hope the Switch 2 is, like, vertical.
Why do you hope that?
Because it would be funny.
That's a phone. That's a phone.
I hope Nintendo just makes a phone.
But no, circling back to the Vita, because the PlayStation, like, legacy of, and, further back then, like, the Sega PlayStation legacy of handheld consoles, right? These, like, high-powered, low battery life. I mean, not that the Switch has great battery life now, but whatever. These, like, high-powered, low battery life devices that are really just meant to be the X console in your pocket is, like, very much the trend of the past few years, right? Steam Deck. What is the Steam Deck if not that? Right?
The Switch, too. That's essentially what the Switch is.
Exactly. The Switch just doesn't have another console for it to be in your pocket. It's itself, but in your pocket.
Yeah.
Or not in your pocket, in your carrying case, in your bag. And then, of course, there's Project Q, the new streaming PlayStation 5
See,
handheld.
What is that? It's not really a portable device.
I don't know how close you have to be to the PlayStation 5, but Yeah, I don't know.
It's what like they announced that and it really confused me. But
it does really
you know
feel
what?
like it's like you have to like I could do it from in here in the bedroom.
That also like that has a real name now, right? Because people are pre-ordering it. I don't know what it is though.
But I like Project Q.
But it like all of its pre-orders sold out. So
The
people want
PlayStation
it,
Portal.
apparently. Play the Portal, great. Yeah, because it's like, you know, the Switch and the deck, you can install games on them. Whatever this is, you're just streaming it from your system. Do you have to leave your system on if you take it somewhere else? Can you do that? Or is it just like, I want to sit in my living room instead of in my bedroom? Or vice versa?
Well, here's the argument that I want to make. The situation where I could see a PlayStation Portal being a handy thing to have, and I don't know if it works this way. I'm not sure if it would allow you to do this, but like, so like my household and whatever, this is fine now because it's just me here. But like, you know, we never bought 2 Nintendo Switches, right? Like we just like one of us would play or whatever, right? And every once in a while, my boyfriend and I would be like, one of us will be playing on the PlayStation and one of us would be playing handheld on the Switch at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. But mostly we like to experience things together, you know? Small tear.
Sure. Sure.
But I could see the value of like, okay, a PS5 is expensive, right? And like if you have
you
like
have to have a PS5 to buy this.
No. Roll with me here.
Okay.
I am now a middle-aged person and I have a family and I want to play
I see.
PS5.
If you live somewhere else, could you stream it from
No, that's not
there?
even what I'm saying. I'm going to the most local possible version of this because I'm not clear. I don't know if I could be like, I'm going to mooch off of you, Emma's PS5 from states away. That seems unlikely to me. But what I'm saying is I'm now a seasoned mother of 4 and I still want to play my PS5, but my teenage children also want to play the PS5. And that makes me angry because I can't buy them.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you can play it at the same time.
If you could, then I'd say that's a device that I could see the value of. I get to play on the system on the TV while my kid in their room who doesn't want to talk to me plays at the same time their different game without me having to buy them a whole system. But I don't know if that's actually how it works.
I don't understand. I admittedly, they announced this and it just like whooshed through my brain. And I have not paid any attention to it since. But yeah, I have no idea what it is or how it works really. Other than like, it's not a Vita or a PSP, right? You can't install games on it.
Yeah.
It's just like taking the games you already own and you can play it like in another area, I guess. But probably at a lower frame rate or like you might get lags or something because it's streaming. I don't know.
Anyway, the PlayStation Portal sort of takes this to its like furthest extreme. And like it is literally your PlayStation.
Yeah.
As a handheld.
Yeah.
But their website says only one PlayStation Portal could be connected to a PS5 console at any one time, FYI. And it is, in fact, over your home Wi-Fi, so cannot leave your house.
Yeah.
So it really is just when you are too depressed to get out of bed.
Yeah.
Which, like, okay, you know?
You're sick with COVID.
Like, yeah, you are hacking up a lung. It cannot stand. They have not announced anything about the battery life, though, so you'd better hope that you brought your charger into your room with you. Yeah. Anyway, my point being that and the Steam Deck and, like, all these, like, bajillion other kind of, like, this company's working on a thing, this company's working on a thing, even the things that are, you know, emulators of old stuff are very much like, it's this console in the palm of your hand. And I don't see a world, and again, Nintendo does weird things, but I don't see a world in which the large gaming companies ever again create something as idiosyncratic as the DS, because I just think in the past, like, 5 or 6 years particularly, we've moved so far away from any kind of meaningful console exclusivity, right?
Yeah.
Over, of course, there's timed releases, there's whatever's gonna happen to all of the Activision stuff, whatever, right? But ultimately, the vast majority of games are developed with the idea that they are eventually going to end up on another console.
Yes. Third-party developers of all sizes are generally developing for at least 2 different systems, right?
Yeah. And the Nintendo Switch is one thing. Like, the hardware capacity is different, right? Like, the things it can handle are different. We get our scary looking Street Fighter faces or whatever that we get to laugh at online.
Even the going from the Xbox Series X to S apparently poses problems.
So all of that is real, and I don't mean to discount that. But if you look at the Switch and you look at the Xbox and you look at the PlayStation, they are still fundamentally, there's a screen and there's more or less the same buttons.
Yes.
And the DS is not even like so far removed from that, but even something that is as simple as, well, now there's 2 screens and you can touch one of them is like, well, that's a thing that has to have its own games. And
technically, the Switch has a touchscreen.
I know it does, but nothing ever really uses the touchscreen.
I constantly, whenever I play something that has like dialogue that you click through, I like beg for the game to have put in touchscreen support so I can progress the dialogue with both hands. However, they never do. So.
And why would they? Extra work.
But sometimes I want to touch the touchscreen to move the dialogue along with my left hand. You know?
I know. Do it for Emma.
Do it
but
for me.
But that's my point. That's my point. This like gaming monoculture, right? I mean, that's not really correct, but this like, because there's more indie stuff out there than ever before. But this gaming, like, my work has to be able to be on all of these systems that are themselves more homogenous, I imagine, than they have ever been before. It just makes the emergence of a handheld like the DS more or less impossible, which is weird when you think about it, because of course the DS is like you said, the second best selling gaming console of all time. So you'd think on that level, oh duh, we want to capture that lightning in a bottle again, except you can't. You never can. I don't care what Playdate is doing over there.
Well, Playdate is like for nerds, right? Playdate is a niche market, right? Playdate is for who they're developing for. I don't feel like they're trying to be a DS.
No, and they're not. But I point that out as, Playdate is sold. Playdate, if you're not aware of it, is a genuinely portable sized console. Like one of these very few. That's another thing, right? As phones get bigger, as everything gets bigger, as all of our eyes rot away from the degradation of air quality or whatever. That's how it works, right? As all of us refuse to eat enough carrots to keep our eyesight. Screens are just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's never going away. But the Playdate is genuinely Emma's handheld thing. It's yellow, tiny, and it's got a fun little crank that you can use. But even something, just that tiny little idiosyncrasy, like that, you're never going to get that on a large scale. And Playdate is super sold out, right? You're not going to be able to get a Playdate. But it does have its own proprietary games, and they are indies, and they have their own little model for it, which is dope. Very cool. But is also sort of the exception that proves the rule of, like, you would never be able to do this, outside of this, like, very indie-focused model.
Yeah. There's also, which I hadn't heard of before, there's, like, the Pocket, which is meant, like, people develop games for it, but it's also compatible with game cartridges from the Game Boy, and with adapters also, like the Game Gear and other ones. So there's people who are like, here's an easier way to do some retro gaming, and also you can develop some games for this as well, which is sort of neat. But
it doesn't surprise me, because Nintendo doesn't do anything that makes sense. But it does surprise me that in the rise of all of these sort of very popular, for what they are anyway, kickstarted, like, handheld things, or not even, kickstarted, like, I'm gonna let you play your Game Boy games. Kickstarted, I'm gonna let you play your Atari games. Like, all of these sort of, like, emulator or not. Pocket is not an emulator, but many of them are emulator systems. That Nintendo doesn't go, well, shouldn't I print some money by doing this legit?
Nintendo hates their old games.
I know.
So
look, I get it. I also probably wouldn't look, because they're all the same dudes, right? Like, they're all like, shoot, that's so embarrassing, this game that I made 15 years ago, 30 years ago. Like, I'm embarrassed by this. What if that is it? What if they're all just like, this is embarrassing?
Well, I mean, they also have their, they have their things on the Nintendo Switch Online plus expansion pass. But even that, like, all of their little collections are very limited in their scope as to what you can play on the Switch with that. And they're remaking a bunch of stuff.
Right.
For whatever reason. So there's that as well.
They do occasionally, like, Nintendo did do their weird, like, here it is, the Zelda Game & Watch.
Yeah.
Everyone was clamoring for.
Nintendo is also, like, they're like, here's some cardboard. So,
Yeah.
they're just doing stuff over there sometimes.
And I will say, that is, like, what makes me feel like, oh, you know what? It is possible that Nintendo could be like, yeah, here's our console with 4 screens. Deal with it. Not for the Switch 2, of course. That's not what I mean. But
Nintendo does have the benefit of having several, like, recognizable franchises that they could use to sell whatever they wanted, right? Or at least try to sell it, right? They put the new Zelda on there, like.
No, that's exactly it. So if you made a console, like, if you made a handheld that had 4 mini screens, let's say, terrible idea, but what do I know? You would, like, the reality of that would be like, okay, like, you have to be developing games exclusively for that console, and that's mostly it. Because most people are not going to deal with that. And yeah, if you're Nintendo, you might be able to pull Breath of the Wild and be like, here it is, and you like, go all in on that killer app thing. Like, here's Tetris. Yeah. Like, you have to buy this to play Tetris. And that's the only outside chance, is if someone was really going to invest in, I'm gonna force you to have FOMO for this.
Yeah.
But I don't know why you would ever do that if you also have the Switch 2 floating around.
Yeah. It is really funny, because that is why I made a joke in the notes. It's like, if they wanted the Vita to sell, they should have made Nomura put a Kingdom Hearts game on it. Because that is why I bought the PSP.
Yeah.
I bought it bundled with Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. It had a big box that had the game art on it. I bought it at GameStop.
I mean, would have sold it to Emma. Except Emma already had a Vita, so.
Really, Kingdom Hearts was funding the portable market,
Seriously.
You had to get it for the next game. For a while there. But yeah, just getting back on topic, the idiosyncrasies of the DS are why I'm so fond of it, because there were so many games that were, like, clearly made for the DS, and not in the same way, like, there were games where you held it sideways like a book. There were games where, we talk about The World Ends With You all the time, and I'm like, I would talk a lot about how I'm so fond of how it was clearly made for the system, if I was talking about why I liked it, right? Because you have to use the touchscreen and the D-pad, and it used, like, its Street Pass functionality. We didn't even talk about, like, Street Pass stuff.
No, we didn't.
They used to have these things in the DS where, like, you would leave it on rest mode, and you'd go out and about, and, like, when other people's DSs were also on rest mode, you'd get, like, benefits in your game.
Yeah.
Wild.
This is why Emma wants them to be small again.
Madeline says she brings the Switch on the subway with her. I could not.
Why not?
Like, it has to go into its case and then into a bag. I'm not just throwing my Switch in my bag. I don't know.
It in its case and then in a bag.
While on the subway?
Yeah.
I would be dropping things.
I'm good at that. I'm always fishing stuff out of my bag on the subway.
Whatever. I'm just saying, it's not... I can't just close it, you know? That's what I really want. I want the Switch to have a full cover, like a foldable cover.
That, I think, is not outside the realm of possibility, because, like, phones are starting to have that. That I could believe. I could believe foldable Switch for Switch 2. But, no, I bring my Switch with me on the train. I mean, I don't play it. The subway is not as crowded as it once was. At least when I'm riding it anyway. Perhaps I am no longer riding it as much at peak rush hour. I think that's also part of it. But I don't know. Like, I don't try to play it when I'm like standing up in a crowded subway, mostly. But yeah, I'll play it when I've got a seat. I'll sit down and get my Switch out.
Well, okay, here's the other fundamental thing, is I can't lay on my back and play my Switch.
You could.
Yeah, but I would, if I dropped it on my face, it would hurt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It wouldn't
I thought you
just
were saying
be like
on the subway, and I was like, you could.
No, just in general. That's the other mark of portability to me. I can't just I have to be sitting up to play my Switch. With my DS, I could be laying on my back, and if I dropped it, it'd be like, oh, but I wouldn't be like, oh god, maybe I broke my nose.
I guess you're right. I still feel like the DS is big enough that I'd be worried, but I have a delicate little nose. So do you.
I guess so. And the Steam Deck is even heavier than the Switch, right? Because it's a little more heavy duty.
Yeah.
So that's even more like your wrist might get tired playing that.
I was very concerned about the physical toll that these take.
Listen, sometimes Baldur's Gate 3 isn't even like an intense game, but sometimes I stop playing that and I put my DualSense down and my hands hurt a lot. So...
Baby gamer hands, straight down.
My baby gamer hands need something lighter, okay?
Anyway, I'm going firmly on the record that there will never be a particularly interesting, very mainstream handheld console ever again. And we can roll this clip when Nintendo does something really weird with the Switch 2.
No, I agree with you, certainly, in that there won't be anything like the Nintendo DS again. For sure.
There's too much financial disincentive to ever do that.
I mean, you see, like, they're porting of some DS games to the Switch, and it's like, well, we tried.
Yep, did our best.
You can clearly see how this would be easier with touchscreen, but
yep.
We don't have that anymore, so there you go.
Yeah. Well, who in the audience wants to buy Emma a Game Boy Advance SP?
I just want to play, like, I know I can play Fire Emblem 7 with the Nintendo Online Plus expansion pass now, but I would have to pay for that every time I wanted to play it. And I have the cartridge.
About? You wouldn't have to pay for it. I would have to pay for it.
Now I would have to pay for that every time I wanted to play it. And I have the cartridge. I'm looking at it right now. It is in front of me. And also, Sacred Stones isn't on there, and I also have that cartridge, so I could play that. You know what I also have? GBA Chain of Memories.
Yeah. I played that. I did not finish it there.
No?
I got stuck.
I don't think I did either. I could play it. I could play GBA Chain of Memories.
Unless you open it up and it's like, the battery's dead, and there's no way to save.
And then I could just leave it on.
Forever.
I mean, it charges. I could just plug it into the wall.
Yeah, I think that machinery would last really well being turned on 24/7, plugged into the wall 24/7.
What's wrong with that?
I feel like, I don't know a lot about how, like, machines work. But that seems bad.
Maybe I just turn into rest mode. Do they have a rest mode? I don't know.
I don't remember.
Whatever.
I hope Nintendo releases their Switch 2 and they're like, it's Bop It.
That would be very good. I hope that the Switch 2 has Bop It features.
Like add-on controllers.
Uh-huh. Anyway, I'm bringing my 3DS on our trip, so look forward to it.
I need to decide what I don't think that I'm gonna bring my Switch. I think I'll just do some computer games.
You know why? Because it's not portable.
It is portable.
Not for an international trip portable, though.
Well, like, I don't know. I brought it to LA. I know that's not international. I brought it to LA. I didn't play it at all, but I did bring it. But no, I'm like, I figure, like, I have to bring my laptop anyway, and so I'm not going to bring, like, another thing on top of that.
That's fair. Could always install Assassin's Creed Mirage on your phone, or whatever.
Could I? I don't even know that if I cleared everything off of my phone that I would have enough storage. I'm going to be very honest. And I would turn it on, and my phone would be like, oh, 1% battery, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, Emma, portable game expert aficionado here. Any closing thoughts?
I miss the Nintendo DS. Back in my day, you could have 2 screens. And it would be glorious.
Okay, Grandma, let's get you to bed.
Another note of, like, I bought my PSP for Birth by Sleep. I don't know if I had that. I think I maybe had, like, 5 games total on the PSP during its lifespan. I played Birth by Sleep. I played all of Crisis Core. I had, like, a tactics game called Jeanne d'Arc. I had one of the YS games that I didn't finish. I probably had more. Those are the 4 that I remember, though.
Very devoted for a
I was really into the PSP.
Dusty little console.
Uh-huh.
Well, listeners, do you have a favorite portable gaming console? Are you like, good riddance, dead and gone, I don't care? Or do you wish they'd come back? Do you have preferences on what size they would be? How do your wrists hold up when you bring the Switch with you places? If you have thoughts on this or anything else that we talked about this week, is Tetris your killer app? Hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, you should subscribe to the show. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts as long as that lasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts. You can probably listen to it on the PS Vita. Subscribe to Talk This.
Tell me what game I should play on my 3DS on the plane.
Is that a call out to the listeners?
To call out to the listeners. Should I play, Radiant Historia? Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse? Bravely Default? Another game?
Tell Emma this. Here's what she should do on the plane. Sleep.
On both of them? On all of them?
No, you're right. The one back, we should not sleep.
See?
No, that's not true. We could sleep a little. But you're right, that the second, 2/3, no sleep.
We've also got tons of train rides,
Yes, the train, that's valid. But the plane ride, please send Emma well wishes of sleep.
Thank you.
Having just recently done the transatlantic, didn't sleep, but I'm going to go and have a day anyway. Good day. Would not recommend, though. So recommend her something that'll put her to sleep. Anyway, next week we're talking about an old game and a new game.
Oh god, I don't know what they are.
It's a surprise. It's a Halloween surprise. Not quite Halloween surprise, an almost Halloween surprise. I was like, oh, they're spooky, but I don't think that they are spooky.
They're space, right. It's Star Ocean and A Space for the Unbound.
Right, and I was like, space is spooky, ha ha ha,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, a week after that, it's 6 weeks in gaming!
Woo!
Live from Amsterdam!
Yeah, we're doing it on our trip, obviously.
Live from Europe.
These are always live noon on Sunday.
Live at noon. That's how podcasts work.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, that's it for our show. Thanks for listening. I'm going to do a sign off. I was going to jump in, but then I didn't have anything. So it's going over to you.
This week, I hope that you can pick up a game and carry it around.